The blizzard screamed across the Montana wilderness like a banshee, hurling ice against the weathered logs of Frank Harrison's cabin. At 68, the retired Marine had weathered many storms, but this one felt different, angrier, more personal. Through the frosted window, he watched snow pile against his door like nature's own barricade. Then he heard it, a sound that shouldn't exist in this frozen hell, whimpering, desperate, dying whimpering. Frank's arthritic hands trembled as he unlatched the door. The Arctic wind slammed into him like a physical blow, but what he saw on his porch stopped his heart cold. 2 German shepherds, their bodies racked with violent shivers, icicles hanging from their fur like crystalline tears. Their eyes, God, their eyes, pleaded with him through the swirling snow. He had no idea that by saving these dying creatures, police cars would surround his home by dawn, and his lonely world would explode into chaos. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching. From now, let's continue with the story. Frank Harrison had built his life around solitude, but it hadn't always been that way. The remote cabin in Cedar Falls, Montana, 45 miles from the nearest neighbor, had once echoed with laughter. Margaret's voice singing while she cooked Sunday dinner. Michael's boots stomping up the porch steps after school, always followed by the excited barking of whatever stray dog he'd befriended that week. Now the silence pressed against Frank's chest like a physical weight. 8 years since cancer took Margaret, despite every prayer, every sleepless night at her bedside, every penny spent on treatments the VA wouldn't cover. 15 months since Detective Michael Harrison had vanished during an undercover operation that his supervisors claimed was classified beyond your clearance level, sir. The Marine in Frank understood duty. The father in him understood abandonment. His weathered hands shook as he poured his morning coffee. Black, no sugar, same as he'd drunk it for 30 years of military service. The kitchen table still bore 3 place settings, a ritual he couldn't break. Margaret's favorite blue plate sat across from him, Michael's Denver Broncos mug to his right. Frank ate alone but refused to acknowledge it. The pension check arrived like clockwork each month, barely enough to cover the cabin's heating bill and his heart medication. Pride prevented him from applying for additional assistance. Real Marines didn't ask for handouts. His drill instructor had hammered into him decades ago. Even when the generator needed repairs he couldn't afford. Even when the roof leaked and his arthritic joints screamed in the cold. Some nights, Frank talked to Margaret's photograph on the mantelpiece, updating her on Michael's case, though the police had stopped returning his calls months ago. "They think he's dead, Maggie," he'd whisper to her, smile. "But I can feel him out there. A father knows." Other nights, he sat in Michael's room, surrounded by high school football trophies and police academy certificates, nursing a glass of whiskey and wondering if anyone would notice if he simply didn't wake up tomorrow. The closest neighbor, Sarah Chen, checked on him monthly, but even her kindness felt like pity. His PTSD had worsened since the losses. Sudden noises triggered flashbacks to Vietnam firefights. Crowds made his chest tighten with panic. Sleep brought nightmares of Margaret's final breath, Michael's imagined death. The VA counselor had prescribed pills that made him feel hollow, so he'd stopped taking them. Frank Harrison, decorated veteran of 2 wars, survivor of countless battles, had been defeated by the cruelest enemy of all, time. It stole everything worth fighting for, leaving him with nothing but memories and the echo of his own breathing in rooms that once brimmed with life. Until 2 German shepherds arrived at his door, half dead in a blizzard, carrying secrets that would shatter his carefully constructed isolation forever. The storm had been building for hours, transforming the Montana wilderness into a white-knuckled nightmare. Frank's ancient radio crackled with emergency broadcasts warning of the worst blizzard in 2 decades. Roads were impassable. Power lines snapped like brittle bones under the weight of ice. The National Weather Service urged residents to shelter in place and pray their heating held out. Frank's generator had other plans. It wheezed, sputtered, and died with a mechanical death rattle that echoed through the cabin like a gunshot. The sudden silence felt ominous. broken only by the wind's relentless assault against his walls. Within minutes, his breath began to fog. The temperature inside plummeted toward freezing. He rationed his remaining firewood, knowing it wouldn't last the night. Margaret had always handled the household preparations. She would have stocked enough supplies to survive a month-long siege. Frank had survived on stubbornness and whiskey, neither of which generated heat. That's when he heard the whimpering. At first, he dismissed it as wind playing tricks through the eaves, but the sound persisted, desperate, rhythmic, undeniably alive. Frank pressed his ear to the door, his heart hammering against his ribs. Something was dying out there. The door fought him, frozen shut by accumulated ice. When it finally surrendered, the Arctic blast nearly knocked him backward. Through the swirling white curtain, two shapes huddled against his porch railing. German shepherds, their magnificent bodies reduced to shivering ruins. Icicles hung from their whiskers like frozen tears. Their paws were raw and bleeding from clawing through snowdrifts. Frank's military training kicked in. Assess, prioritize, act. These weren't ordinary strays. Their breeding was obvious even in their weakened state. Strong bone structure, intelligent eyes, the bearing of animals born for purpose. Their collars were expensive leather, though any identification tags had been torn away by the storm. The larger dog, a male with distinctive black markings, tried to stand when Frank approached. His legs buckled, but his eyes never left Frank's face. Pleading, trusting, desperate, the female stayed protectively close to her companion, her breathing shallow and labored. "Easy, boy. Easy, girl." Frank's voice cracked with emotion he hadn't felt in months. "Let's get you inside." Lifting them required strength his aging body barely possessed. His bad back screamed in protest as he carried first one, then the other, into the cabin's dying warmth. The dogs collapsed onto his worn rug, too exhausted to explore their surroundings. Frank sacrificed his last bundle of firewood, building a fire that filled the room with blessed heat. He wrapped the dogs in Margaret's quilts, the ones that still smelled faintly of her lavender perfume. For the first time since her death, those blankets served their intended purpose, bringing comfort to suffering souls. The dogs' training became apparent as they recovered. They responded to basic commands with military precision. The male sat at attention despite his weakness. The female remained alert, scanning for threats even while accepting Frank's care. These animals had been molded by discipline and purpose. Frank shared his meager dinner, canned stew stretched thin, the last of his bread. The dogs ate with desperate gratitude, their tails attempting weak wags. He found himself talking to them, filling the silence that had suffocated him for months. "What are you two doing out here?" he murmured, stroking the male's damp fur. "Someone's missing you. Someone's probably scared sick, wondering where you are." The irony wasn't lost on him. For the first time in over a year, Frank wasn't alone. These bedraggled refugees had stumbled into his isolated world, bringing purpose he'd forgotten existed. As the dog settled beside the fire, Frank felt something he'd thought died with his family, the fierce protectiveness of a man with something worth defending. Dawn arrived with deceptive calm. The blizzard had exhausted itself overnight, leaving behind a crystalline world buried under 3 feet of pristine snow. Frank stirred in his chair by the dying fire, his neck stiff from sleeping upright. The dogs, he'd started thinking of them as Rex and Luna, lay curled together on Margaret's quilts, their breathing steady and strong. Then Rex's ears snapped to attention. A low growl rumbled in his throat as he rose, positioning himself between Frank and the front door. Luna joined him instantly, both dogs radiating tension that made Frank's pulse quicken. Through the frost-covered window, he glimpsed movement in the tree line. The sound hit him like a physical blow, the unmistakable rumble of multiple vehicles climbing his narrow access road. Frank's PTSD triggered immediately, catapulting him back to pre-dawn raids in Vietnam. His hands shook as memories of mortar fire and screaming comrades flooded his consciousness. The walls seemed to close in. "Easy, boys," he whispered. though he wasn't sure if he was talking to the dogs or himself. Through the window, Frank watched his worst nightmare materialize. Police cruisers emerged from the forest like mechanical predators, their red and blue lights painting the snow in carnival colors. 8 vehicles formed a semicircle around his cabin, blocking every escape route. Officers poured out, their hands resting on holstered weapons. Sheriff Tom Bradley's voice boomed through a megaphone. "Frank Harrison, this is the Cedar Falls Sheriff's Department. We need you to come outside with your hands visible." Frank's heart hammered against his ribs. The dogs flanked him protectively, their bodies coiled for action. Rex positioned himself at Frank's left side, the exact position Michael's old K9 partner had taken during training exercises years ago. The similarity sent chills down Frank's spine. "We know you have the dogs, Mr. Harrison," Sheriff Bradley continued. "We're here to recover stolen federal property. Come out peacefully and no one gets hurt." Stolen? The word hit Frank like a slap. He stared down at Rex and Luna, their intelligent eyes meeting his with unwavering loyalty. These magnificent animals weren't stolen goods. They were survivors, just like him. He'd saved their lives while risking his own. Frank's military training warred with his emotional attachment. Logic demanded compliance with law enforcement. His heart screamed against surrendering the only companions he'd had in months. The dogs seemed to sense his internal conflict, pressing closer to his legs with gentle whines. "Mr. Harrison, we have a warrant," Deputy Martinez shouted. These dogs were stolen from a federal K9 training facility. They're worth $50,000 each. $50,000. The number staggered Frank. His monthly pension wouldn't earn that much in 5 years. What kind of operation could afford such valuable animals? And why would anyone abandon them in a killing blizzard? The cabin door shuddered under authoritative knocks. Frank's breathing became shallow and rapid, classic signs of an anxiety attack. The walls felt like they were closing in, just like the tunnels in Da Nang when the mortars started falling. His vision blurred at the edges. Rex sensed Frank's distress and pressed against his legs, providing physical support. Luna positioned herself at the door, not aggressively, but as a clear barrier between her adopted family and the perceived threat outside. "This is your final warning, Mr. Harrison." Sheriff Bradley's patience was wearing thin. "Open this door or we're coming in." Frank's hands trembled as he reached for the latch. Everything he'd lost, Margaret to cancer, Michael to whatever classified nightmare had swallowed him whole, had been beyond his control. But not this. Not today. These dogs had chosen him, trusted him, needed him. For the first time in 15 months, Frank Harrison felt necessary. The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd spent his entire adult life serving law and order, first as a Marine, then as a man who respected the badge his son wore. Now he stood on the wrong side of that thin blue line, branded a federal criminal for an act of mercy. As Frank's fingers closed around the door handle, Rex and Luna moved to flank him. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The old Marine drew a shaking breath, straightened his shoulders with military bearing, and prepared to confront the consequences of choosing compassion over compliance. The door swung open to reveal 8 officers with weapons drawn, their faces grim with professional determination. The interrogation room at Cedar Falls Sheriff's Department felt like a concrete tomb. Frank sat across from FBI agent Patricia Walsh, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s, whose federal credentials carried more weight than the local badge Sheriff Bradley wore. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows that made everyone look guilty. "Mr. Harrison," Agent Walsh began, sliding a manila folder across the metal table. "These aren't ordinary dogs. They're German shepherds, bred specifically for federal law enforcement. Each animal represents years of selective breeding and specialized training." Frank's weathered hands remained folded in his lap. "I found them dying in a blizzard. Any decent human being would have done the same." "That's what you claim." Agent Walsh opened the folder, revealing photographs of the federal K9 facility, pristine kennels, training obstacles, handlers in tactical gear. "But your isolation, your military background, your financial struggles." It paints a different picture. The implication hung in the air like smoke. Frank's monthly pension barely covered his medication and heating bills. To outsiders, he looked like a desperate man who might steal valuable animals for profit. "You think I'm running some kind of dog theft operation from a cabin with no internet?" Frank's voice carried decades of command authority. "That's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard." Sheriff Bradley leaned forward. "Frank, we've known each other for 15 years. Help us understand. These dogs disappeared 3 days ago during a training exercise. Security footage shows they were deliberately released by someone with inside knowledge." "Inside knowledge?" Frank's confusion was genuine. "I haven't left my property in 2 months. Ask Sarah Chen. She brings my groceries because I can't afford the gas to drive to town." Agent Walsh consulted her notes. "Sarah Chen, your neighbor. Interestingly, she's also a veterinarian, someone with expertise in handling valuable animals." The suggestion that Sarah might be involved sent fury coursing through Frank's veins. "That woman has shown me more kindness than anyone deserves. If you're looking for criminals, look somewhere else." Outside the interrogation room, the investigation deepened. FBI technicians processed Frank's cabin for evidence, while Rex and Luna were transported to a secure facility for examination. The dog's resistance to separation had required tranquilizers, a detail that didn't escape Agent Walsh's attention. "Stolen animals don't typically bond that strongly with their captors," Deputy Martinez observed, watching video footage of the dog's removal. "Those two acted like they were protecting family." Meanwhile, the media circus began. Local news stations picked up the story. Isolated veteran accused of federal dog theft. The narrative wrote itself. A desperate old man, forgotten by society, turning to crime to survive. Veterans groups rallied to Frank's defense, while online commenters debated his guilt with armchair certainty. Sarah Chen arrived at the sheriff's station like an avenging angel, her usual composure replaced by righteous fury. "This is insane," she told anyone who would listen. "Frank Harrison couldn't steal a newspaper, let alone orchestrate some elaborate heist. That man can barely drive to the mailbox without having a panic attack." Agent Walsh's investigation revealed disturbing patterns. The canine facility had experienced 3 thefts in 18 months, always during severe weather when security was compromised. The stolen animals were worth a combined $250,000, suggesting organized crime rather than desperate individuals. Back in the interrogation room, Frank's health deteriorated under stress. His heart condition, exacerbated by anxiety and sleepless nights, caused chest pains that he tried to hide. Agent Walsh noticed his pale complexion and labored breathing but pressed her advantage. "Mr. Harrison, we found something interesting in our background check." She produced another document. "Your son Michael was investigating animal trafficking before his disappearance." "Quite a coincidence, don't you think?" The mention of Michael shattered Frank's composure. His hands trembled as old grief and new fear collided. Michael was working organized crime. He never discussed details because of security protocols. Security protocols. Agent Walsh's tone suggested skepticism. Or perhaps he discovered his father's involvement in the very crimes he was investigating. "You're out of line." Frank's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper, the tone he'd used with insubordinate recruits decades ago. "My son was a good cop. He died serving his country, just like I did, just like his mother did, caring for other people's problems instead of her own health." "Died?" Agent Walsh's eyebrows rose. "Mr. Harrison, your son's status is classified as missing, not deceased." The distinction felt meaningless to Frank. Missing for 15 months without contact meant dead in any reasonable interpretation. But Agent Walsh's phrasing suggested she knew something he didn't. DNA results from the dogs revealed unexpected connections. Rex and Luna were siblings from a champion bloodline, their genetic profiles matching animals that had disappeared from facilities across 3 states. The theft ring was far more sophisticated than initially suspected. Security footage analysis provided another revelation. The person who released the dogs from the federal facility moved with military precision, suggesting combat training. The figure's face remained hidden, but their methodology screamed professional expertise. Agent Walsh returned to the interrogation room with new ammunition. "Mr. Harrison, we've discovered your son Michael was investigating this specific theft ring when he disappeared. These dogs were part of his case file." Frank's world tilted. The possibility that Rex and Luna were connected to Michael's disappearance transformed everything. Were they evidence? Were they witnesses? Or were they bait in some elaborate trap? "I want to see those case files," Frank demanded, his protective instincts overriding cooperation. "That information is classified beyond your security clearance," Agent Walsh replied coldly. "My security clearance?" Frank's laugh held no humor. "Lady, I held top-secret clearance when you were still in diapers. If my son died investigating these crimes, I have a right to know." The admission hung heavy in the room. Agent Walsh studied Frank with new interest. His military records indicated extensive special operations experience, the kind of background that could facilitate sophisticated theft operations. But his emotional reaction to Michael's case seemed genuine. Outside, Sarah Chen organized community support for Frank. Local veterans, church members, and neighbors who barely knew him rallied around the narrative of an innocent man caught in federal overreach. The story resonated with rural Americans who distrusted government authority. As evening approached, Agent Walsh faced mounting pressure to either charge Frank or release him. The evidence remained circumstantial. Proximity, opportunity, and financial motive weren't enough for federal prosecution. But something about the case felt orchestrated, as if Frank was meant to be discovered with the dogs. Frank sat alone in the holding cell, staring at his weathered hands. Somewhere in a federal facility, Rex and Luna were caged and confused, probably wondering why their savior had abandoned them. The thought broke his heart more than any personal consequences he might face. He closed his eyes and whispered a prayer Margaret had taught him. "Lord, grant me the strength to protect those who cannot protect themselves." He had no idea that outside the sheriff's station someone was watching and waiting, someone who had orchestrated this entire nightmare for reasons that ran deeper than stolen dogs or federal investigations. The third night of Frank's detention brought unexpected visitors to the sheriff's station. Agent Walsh was reviewing case files when Deputy Martinez burst into her office, his face pale with urgency. "Ma'am, we've got a problem. Someone just walked into the lobby claiming responsibility for the dog thefts." Agent Walsh followed Martinez to the front desk, where a man in expensive clothing sat calmly filling out paperwork. Marcus Webb, according to his driver's license, was 58 years old, with the bearing of someone accustomed to authority. His silver hair was perfectly styled, his suit immaculate despite the late hour. "Mr. Webb," Agent Walsh introduced herself, studying the man with professional skepticism. "You're confessing to federal crimes?" "Not confessing," Webb corrected with a slight smile, clarifying. "Frank Harrison is innocent. The real criminal has been watching this farce long enough." Agent Walsh's instincts screamed warning. Webb's timing was too convenient, his demeanor too controlled. "And you would know this how?" "Because I orchestrated the entire operation." Webb's admission carried no shame, only cold calculation. Frank was never supposed to be caught. He was supposed to die with those dogs in the blizzard. The revelation sent shockwaves through the station. Sheriff Bradley joined the interrogation as Webb calmly detailed his crimes. The theft ring spanned multiple states, targeting high-value animals for overseas buyers who paid premium prices for American-trained K9s. "Why target Frank specifically?" Agent Walsh demanded. Webb's expression darkened. "Frank Harrison ruined my military career 30 years ago, filed a report that cost me my rank, my pension, my future. I've been waiting decades for the right opportunity to destroy him." The personal vendetta explained the elaborate setup. Webb had released the dogs during the blizzard, knowing Frank's location and character. The old Marine's compassionate nature made him predictable. He would save dying animals regardless of consequences. "You planned for him to freeze to death," Sheriff Bradley realized with horror. "Poetic justice," Webb replied without emotion. "The hero dies saving innocent creatures, while evidence points to his guilt, his reputation destroyed posthumously, just like he destroyed mine." Agent Walsh pressed for details about Michael Harrison's disappearance. Webb's reaction, a flicker of genuine surprise, suggested he wasn't involved in the detective's case. But his knowledge of Frank's family situation was disturbingly comprehensive. "I've been watching Frank for months," Webb admitted, "learning his routines, his weaknesses, his isolation, the perfect target for a perfect crime." The interrogation revealed Webb's methodical planning. He'd studied Frank's military records, his financial struggles, his declining health. The theft was designed to appear like desperate criminality by a forgotten veteran. Meanwhile, at the federal facility, Rex and Luna exhibited increasingly distressed behavior. They refused food, ignored handlers, and spent hours staring at the exit doors. Veterinary examination revealed something extraordinary. Both dogs had been microchipped with high-security identification, normally reserved for classified operations. Dr. Jennifer Hayes, the facility's chief veterinarian, called Agent Walsh with urgent news. "These aren't just training dogs. According to their chips, they're part of a specialized program I don't have clearance to access. The identification numbers route to a classified federal database." Agent Walsh's blood ran cold. If Rex and Luna were involved in classified operations, Frank's case had implications far beyond simple theft. She immediately contacted her FBI superiors, triggering a chain of calls that reached the highest levels of federal law enforcement. Within hours, a convoy of black SUVs arrived at Cedar Falls. Federal agents in tactical gear secured the sheriff's station, while senior officials took control of the investigation. Agent Walsh found herself sidelined as classification levels beyond her access came into play. Frank remained unaware of these developments, sitting in his cell and wondering about the dog's welfare. His heart condition worsened under stress, but he refused medical attention, claiming he deserved whatever punishment came his way. Sarah Chen organized a vigil outside the sheriff's station, drawing supporters from across Montana. Veterans, church members, and rural residents who understood government overreach rallied to Frank's defense. Local news coverage portrayed him as a victim of federal persecution. The arrival of federal reinforcements intensified public scrutiny. Protesters demanded Frank's release, while officials remained tight-lipped about classified aspects of the case. The story gained national attention as a symbol of government treatment of veterans. Inside the secure federal command post, Agent Walsh learned the truth about Rex and Luna. They weren't just K-9 trainees. They were part of an elite program, training dogs for deep cover operations. Their handlers were federal agents, working undercover assignments too sensitive for normal law enforcement channels. The dog's last handler was Detective Michael Harrison, revealed Commander Sarah Torres, the federal official now directing the investigation. He was working a joint federal-local operation when he disappeared 15 months ago. The connection between Michael's disappearance and the dog's arrival at Frank's cabin couldn't be coincidental. Someone had deliberately brought Rex and Luna to the old Marine, but whether as evidence, protection, or trap remained unclear. Webb's interrogation took ominous turns as federal agents pressed him about Michael Harrison. His denials seemed genuine, but his criminal network had tentacles reaching into law enforcement agencies across multiple states. "I never touched the cop," Webb insisted. "My beef was with Frank, not his boy." Agent Walsh studied Webb's psychological profile. His hatred for Frank was deeply personal, rooted in perceived injustice that had festered for decades. But the elaborate nature of his revenge suggested mental instability beyond simple grudges. "You spent months planning this," she observed. "Watching Frank, learning his habits, waiting for the perfect storm. That level of obsession indicates serious psychological disturbance." Webb's facade cracked slightly. "You don't understand what he took from me. My honor, my future, my identity. Everything I was supposed to be died because of his self-righteous report. The military incident Webb referenced was easily verifiable. Frank had indeed filed a misconduct report that resulted in Webb's demotion and eventual discharge. But the charges, corruption, abuse of authority, theft of military supplies, painted Webb as the villain, not the victim. As dawn approached, federal officials faced impossible choices. Frank's innocence was established, but releasing him might compromise ongoing classified operations. Webb's confession solved the theft charges, but raised questions about larger criminal networks and Michael Harrison's fate. In his cell, Frank experienced chest pains that could no longer be ignored. His refusal of medical attention had pushed his damaged heart to its limits. As EMTs prepared to transport him to the hospital, Frank's last conscious thought was of Rex and Luna, wondering if they understood why he couldn't protect them. The ambulance sirens wailing through Cedar Falls marked the end of Frank's ordeal and the beginning of something far more complex. Classified operations, missing federal agents, and personal vendettas had converged around an isolated cabin where an old Marine had simply tried to save 2 dying dogs. Sarah Chen followed the ambulance to the hospital, praying for the man who had become an unexpected symbol of decency in an increasingly complicated world. She had no idea that within hours, Frank's nightmare would transform into something resembling a miracle, as truths hidden for 15 months finally surfaced. The federal agents maintaining their vigil around the hospital were about to receive intelligence that would change everything they thought they knew about Detective Michael Harrison's disappearance and the remarkable dogs who had found their way home. Frank's heart monitor flatlined at 3:47 a.m. The sustained tone pierced the quiet hospital corridor like a death knell, sending nurses rushing toward room 304. Dr. Elizabeth Morrison led the resuscitation team, her hands moving with practiced precision as she fought to restart the heart of a man who had already lost everything worth living for. "He's in cardiac arrest," she announced, beginning chest compressions. "Get me an amp of epinephrine and charge the defibrillator to 200 joules. Sarah Chen stood frozen in the hallway, watching through the window as medical professionals battled for Frank's life. The old Marine's body convulsed with each electric shock, his weathered face slack and gray beneath the oxygen mask. 3 times they shocked him. 3 times his heart refused to respond. "Come on, Frank," Dr. Morrison whispered, continuing compressions. "Don't give up now." In the federal holding facility, Rex and Luna began howling simultaneously. The sound was haunting, primal, the kind of anguished cry that speaks to something deeper than training or instinct. Night shift guards reported that both dogs had suddenly stopped eating and begun pacing their kennels with desperate intensity, as if sensing catastrophe from miles away. Dr. Jennifer Hayes, monitoring the dogs via security cameras, noticed their distress. "It's like they know something's wrong," she told her assistant. "I've never seen behavior like this from trained animals." Back at Cedar Falls Memorial Hospital, Frank's vital signs remained critical. Even if they managed to restart his heart, the damage from his prolonged cardiac episode might be irreversible. Dr. Morrison explained to Sarah that Frank's body was simply worn out. Decades of military stress, untreated PTSD, inadequate nutrition, and the trauma of recent events had pushed his cardiovascular system beyond its limits. "He's been running on empty for months," she said gently. Sometimes the body just decides it's time to stop fighting. Agent Walsh arrived at the hospital to find Sarah Chen weeping in the waiting room. The sight of this strong, composed woman breaking down drove home the human cost of their investigation. Frank Harrison wasn't just a suspect or a witness. He was someone's friend, someone's anchor in a lonely world. "Any change?" Agent Walsh asked quietly. Sarah shook her head. "They got his heart started again, but he's in a coma. The doctor says his brain was without oxygen for almost 4 minutes, even if he wakes up." She couldn't finish the sentence. The cruelest irony wasn't lost on either woman. Frank had survived combat zones, personal tragedies, and crushing loneliness, only to be destroyed by an act of compassion. Saving Rex and Luna had set in motion the events that might ultimately kill him. In his hospital bed, Frank's unconscious mind wandered through memories. He was back in Vietnam, carrying wounded comrades to safety. He was holding Margaret's hand as cancer stole her breath. He was teaching young Michael to throw a football in their backyard, the boys' laughter echoing across the years. But darker memories intruded. The report he'd filed against Marcus Webb all those years ago, documenting corruption that destroyed a fellow Marine's career. Frank had done his duty, followed regulations, upheld military honor. Yet now it seemed that single act of integrity had sealed his fate. The heart monitor's steady beep provided the only sound in room 304 as Frank Harrison fought his final battle. Outside, federal agents maintained their vigil, waiting for developments in a case that had spiraled far beyond stolen dogs. Sarah Chen refused to leave, holding vigil for a man who had shown her that heroism sometimes meant simply caring about helpless creatures. Neither woman knew that classified communications were buzzing between federal agencies, carrying intelligence that would transform Frank's tragedy into something approaching redemption. The truth about Michael Harrison was finally surfacing, and with it, answers that would justify every moment of an old Marine's suffering. Frank's eyes opened to blinding fluorescent light and the steady beep of medical equipment. His throat felt raw, his chest ached, and every muscle in his body screamed protest. But he was alive, a fact that seemed to surprise everyone, including himself. "Welcome back, soldier," said a voice he didn't recognize. Frank turned his head slowly, his vision gradually focusing on a tall man in a dark suit, standing beside his hospital bed. The stranger had kind eyes, but carried himself with unmistakable federal authority. "I'm Director James Patterson, FBI," the man introduced himself. "We need to talk, Mr. Harrison, about your son." The words hit Frank like electric shock. "Michael?" His voice came out as a whisper. "Is he alive?" Director Patterson said quickly, noting Frank's spiking heart rate on the monitor. "Detective Michael Harrison is alive, Mr. Harrison. He's been in federal protective custody for the past 15 months. Frank's world tilted. 15 months of grief, of believing his son was dead, of talking to empty rooms and setting places at the table for ghosts. The emotional whiplash was almost more than his damaged heart could handle. "That's impossible," Frank gasped. "They told me he disappeared during an undercover operation. They said what they were authorized to say," Patterson interrupted gently. "Michael was investigating a multi-state animal trafficking ring with connections to organized crime. His cover was blown, and we had to extract him immediately. For his safety and the integrity of the operation, we couldn't tell anyone, including family, that he'd survived." Sarah Chen burst through the door, her face streaked with tears of relief. "Frank, oh my God, we thought—" She stopped short, noticing the federal director. "I'm sorry, I didn't know you had visitors." "Sarah, stay," Frank said weakly. "This man says Michael is alive." Director Patterson nodded to Sarah, then continued his explanation. "The trafficking ring Michael was investigating specializes in high-value animals, military and police canines, exotic breeds, endangered species. They have buyers in countries where American-trained animals bring premium prices." Frank's mind reeled. Rex and Luna were part of Michael's investigation. He'd been tracking their theft for months when his cover was compromised. In the chaos of his extraction, the dogs were separated from the team. We've been searching for them ever since. The revelation explained so much: the dogs' specialized training, their apparent military discipline, their mysterious appearance at his cabin. But questions remained. "Why didn't anyone tell me?" Frank's voice carried decades of pain. "I buried my son in my heart. I grieved for him every day." "Because we had intelligence suggesting the trafficking ring might target you to get to Michael," Patterson replied. "Your isolation made you vulnerable, but it also made you safe, as long as they believed Michael was dead." Sarah moved closer to Frank's bedside, her veterinary instincts checking his color and breathing. This is too much shock for someone who just had a heart attack, she warned. Director Patterson acknowledged her concern but pressed on. Mr. Harrison, Rex and Luna didn't find your cabin by accident. Michael trained them to seek you out if something happened to him. They're not just police dogs. They're his insurance policy, programmed to protect his family. Frank closed his eyes, overwhelmed by implications. His son had thought of everything, even from deep cover. The dogs weren't random strays. They were messages, proof of life, guardians sent by a son who couldn't come home. Marcus Webb, Frank said suddenly. He confessed to the thefts, said he wanted revenge against me. Webb was a convenient patsy, Patterson revealed. Yes, he's involved in animal trafficking, and yes, he has a personal grudge against you. But he's small time compared to the real organization. We've been using his confession to flush out the bigger players. The hospital room door opened again, and Frank's heart nearly stopped. Detective Michael Harrison stood in the doorway, 15 months older and bearing the weight of deep cover operations, but unmistakably alive. "Hello, Dad," Michael said softly. Frank couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. The son he'd mourned stood before him, real and solid and whole. Sarah stepped back, recognizing the sacred nature of the moment. "I'm sorry," Michael whispered, approaching the bed. "I'm so sorry. I couldn't tell you." "I'm sorry I let you believe I was dead." Frank reached out with trembling hands, touching Michael's face to confirm this wasn't another hospital hallucination. "You're real," he breathed. "You're actually real." "I'm real, Dad, and I'm here because of Rex and Luna. They did exactly what I trained them to do. They found you and brought help." The reunion was interrupted by commotion in the hallway. Rex and Luna had been transported from the federal facility, and their excited barking echoed through the hospital corridors. Director Patterson had authorized their presence as part of Michael's debriefing, but the dogs had their own agenda. They burst into the room like furry missiles, immediately positioning themselves around Frank's bed. Rex placed his massive head on Frank's chest, while Luna pressed against his legs. Their joy was infectious, tails wagging so hard their entire bodies wiggled. "They remember you," Michael observed with wonder. "Even after everything they've been through, they remember who saved them." Frank buried his face in Rex's fur, finally allowing himself to cry. Not tears of grief, but of overwhelming relief and gratitude. His family, expanded now to include 4 legs and wet noses, was whole again. Sarah watched the reunion with professional and personal satisfaction. "I need to check your vitals," she told Frank, though she was really buying time for him to process the emotional shock. "The trafficking ring," Frank asked Michael. "Is it over?" "Getting close," Michael replied. "Webb's confession gave us the last pieces we needed. There'll be arrests across 6 states within the week. And Dad?" He paused, meeting his father's eyes. "The report you filed against Webb 30 years ago. That's what started this whole investigation. Your integrity then helped us build the case now." The irony was profound. Frank's adherence to military honor decades ago had set in motion events that would ultimately save countless animals and break up a major criminal organization. His son had followed that same moral compass into dangerous waters. Director Patterson cleared his throat. "Mr. Harrison, there's one more thing. The federal government owes you a debt of gratitude. Rex and Luna's survival is directly attributable to your actions. Without them, we might never have located Michael or completed this investigation." Frank looked around the room, at his son, his neighbor who'd become family, the federal director acknowledging his service, and the 2 dogs who'd brought them all together. 3 days ago, he'd been a forgotten veteran contemplating his own mortality. Now he was surrounded by proof that his life had mattered. "What happens now?" he asked. "Now we heal," Michael said simply. "All of us, together." Rex woofed softly, as if agreeing with the plan. Luna's tail thumped against the hospital bed, keeping time with Frank's strengthening heartbeat. The old Marine who'd lost everything had found it again in the most unexpected way. 2 freezing dogs on his doorstep, had carried with them the greatest gift imaginable: hope for the future and redemption for the past. Outside the hospital window, snow continued to fall on Cedar Falls, Montana. But inside room 304, warmth radiated from a family reunited against impossible odds, protected by the unwavering loyalty of two remarkable dogs who understood that love, once given, never truly dies. Frank Harrison closed his eyes and smiled, listening to the voices of his family and the gentle breathing of Rex and Luna. For the first time in 15 months, he fell asleep without nightmares, surrounded by the sound of life continuing. 6 months later, the Harrison cabin bore little resemblance to the isolated fortress where Frank had hidden from the world. Fresh logs reinforced the foundation, new windows let in golden autumn light, and the sound of laughter echoed across the Montana wilderness for the first time in years. Frank stood on his renovated porch, watching Michael install a dog run that could accommodate 2 energetic German shepherds. Rex and Luna supervised the construction project with typical canine intensity, occasionally offering helpful suggestions in the form of barks and tail wags. "A little to the left, son," Frank called out, his voice strong again after months of cardiac rehabilitation and proper nutrition. "I know what I'm doing, Dad," Michael replied with good-natured exasperation. "I built this exact same setup at my apartment in Denver, the apartment Michael would be leaving behind." After 15 months undercover and another 6 months testifying in federal trials, Detective Michael Harrison had requested transfer to the Montana State Police. Cedar Falls needed a new deputy sheriff, and Frank needed his son closer than a 6-hour drive. Sarah Chen arrived with grocery bags and medical supplies, her monthly welfare checks having evolved into weekly dinner invitations and daily friendship. She'd become the sister Frank never had, and the mother figure Michael had missed during his dangerous years in law enforcement. "How's our patient today?" she asked, noting Frank's improved color and steady movement. "Ornery as ever," Michael answered before Frank could speak. He insisted on helping with the fence posts despite doctor's orders to take it easy. Frank waved dismissively. "Dr. Morrison worries too much." A man needs purpose, and sitting in a rocking chair all day isn't living, it's just waiting to die. The transformation in Frank's health had amazed medical professionals. Dr. Morrison attributed his recovery to improved nutrition, regular medication compliance, and most importantly, having reasons to wake up each morning. Rex and Luna demanded daily walks. Michael needed help with home renovation projects, and Sarah required assistance organizing veteran support groups across the county. "Speaking of purpose," Sarah said, pulling official-looking documents from her bag, "the Veterans Administration approved your application. You're officially certified as a peer counselor for combat veterans with PTSD." Frank accepted the papers with hands that no longer trembled. 3 months ago, he'd started volunteering at the VA hospital in Great Falls, sharing his story with isolated veterans who'd lost hope. His message was simple: healing comes through connection, and it's never too late to rebuild. "Tom Bradley called this morning," Michael announced, wiping sweat from his forehead. "The last of Webb's associates were sentenced yesterday. 22 people across 6 states, all connected to the trafficking ring. The judge said your testimony was instrumental in getting maximum sentences." Marcus Webb himself had received 15 years in federal prison. His elaborate revenge plot against Frank had unraveled spectacularly, exposing a criminal network that had operated for decades. The irony wasn't lost on Frank. Webb's hatred had ultimately destroyed the very organization he'd worked for. Rex bounded over to Frank, dropping a tennis ball at his feet with expectant eyes. The daily ritual of fetch had become sacred time for both man and dog, rebuilding trust and joy, one throw at a time. "You boys getting restless?" Frank asked, scratching Rex behind the ears while Luna pressed against his legs for attention. The dogs had officially retired from federal service, their trauma from the trafficking experience making them unsuitable for future undercover work. But their loyalty to Frank remained absolute. They slept in his room, followed him around the property, and seemed to sense his emotional state with uncanny accuracy. "Dad," Michael said carefully, setting down his tools, "there's something I need to tell you about Mom." Frank's expression sobered. They'd talked extensively about Margaret's death, Michael's guilt over being away during her final months, and Frank's anger at facing that loss alone. "I visited her grave yesterday," Michael continued, "left flowers, and told her about everything that's happened, about Rex and Luna, about you getting healthy again, about me coming home." Frank nodded, his throat tight with emotion. "She always said you'd find your way back to me, even when I stopped believing it myself. The headstone looked weathered, so I arranged for restoration. But Dad, I found something else there, something you left." From his truck, Michael retrieved a small wooden cross bearing Margaret's name and the inscription, "Beloved Wife and Mother." Frank had carved it during his darkest months, when visiting the cemetery felt like his only connection to happiness. "I never meant for you to see that," Frank said quietly. "I'm glad I did. It shows me how much you loved her, how much you love all of us, even when you thought you were alone." Sarah quietly busied herself organizing medical supplies, giving father and son space for their moment. She'd watched their relationship heal over months of honest conversation, shared work, and gradual trust building. The autumn sun cast long shadows across the property as Frank reflected on the journey from despair to hope. Rex and Luna had been the catalysts, but the real transformation came through reconnecting with people who mattered. Family, community, purpose. "I've been thinking about Thanksgiving," Frank said suddenly. "It's been 8 years since I cooked a proper dinner." "We could help," Sarah offered. "Michael's useless in the kitchen, but I make excellent stuffing." "Hey," Michael protested. "I can cook. Remember my famous grilled cheese sandwiches?" "Burning bread doesn't count as cooking," Frank replied with mock seriousness. Their laughter carried across the wilderness, a sound that would have been impossible 6 months earlier. Rex and Luna added their voices to the joy, barking and running in circles around their human pack. As evening approached, they gathered on the porch to watch the sunset paint the Montana sky in brilliant oranges and purples. Frank sat in Margaret's old rocking chair, Rex at his feet and Luna's head resting on his lap. Michael occupied the chair he'd used as a teenager, while Sarah settled on the porch steps with a cup of coffee. "You know what I'm grateful for?" Frank said, breaking the comfortable silence. "What's that, Dad?" "The blizzard. If it hadn't been for that storm, Rex and Luna never would have found me. You never would have come home. We never would have learned that sometimes the worst things lead to the best things." Michael reached over and squeezed his father's shoulder. "Mom used to say that God works in mysterious ways." "Your mother was a wise woman," Frank replied. "Wiser than I deserved." Sarah stood to leave, gathering her things as darkness settled over the mountains. "Same time next week?" she asked. "Wouldn't miss it," Frank confirmed. "And Sarah, thank you for everything. Thank you for showing me what courage looks like," she replied. "Not just facing danger, but facing loneliness and choosing to open your heart again." After Sarah's taillights disappeared down the mountain road, Frank and Michael sat in comfortable silence. Rex and Luna dozed peacefully, their breathing synchronized with the evening breeze. "I love you, Dad," Michael said quietly. "I should have said it more often before. I love you too, son. And I'm proud of the man you've become, even if your path scared me sometimes." The stars emerged one by one above Cedar Falls, Montana, illuminating a landscape transformed by love and second chances. Frank Harrison, who'd once planned his own funeral, now made plans for Christmas dinner and spring garden projects. Inside the cabin, Margaret's photograph still occupied its place of honor on the mantelpiece, but now it was surrounded by pictures of Rex and Luna, Michael's police academy graduation, and Sarah's veterinary practice. The shrine to the past had become a celebration of the present. Frank's final ritual before bed remained unchanged. He spoke to Margaret's picture, updating her on daily events and telling her how much he missed her. But now his words carried hope instead of despair. "The boys are settling in well, Maggie," he whispered to her smile. "Michael's staying for good this time. Rex caught his first rabbit today, and Luna learned to open the screen door by herself. Sarah brought enough casserole to feed an army, as usual. He paused, studying his wife's face in the flickering lamplight. I know you sent them to me. The dogs, Michael coming home, all of it. You always did take better care of us than we took care of ourselves. Rex woofed softly from his bed beside Frank's chair, as if agreeing with the assessment. I'll see you in my dreams, sweetheart. Save room at the table for all of us when the time comes. Frank turned off the lamp and headed to bed, accompanied by two loyal shadows who'd traveled through hell to bring him home to himself. Outside, snow began to fall again on the Montana wilderness, but inside the Harrison cabin, warmth and love had conquered winter forever. Sometimes life strips away everything we thought mattered. Career, health, loved ones, leaving us wondering if we've become invisible to the world. Frank Harrison understood that crushing loneliness, the kind that makes you question whether anyone would notice if you simply disappeared. But in his darkest hour, when death seemed easier than another empty day, two freezing souls appeared at his door. What followed wasn't just rescue, it was redemption. Frank discovered that even when we feel forgotten, we still have the power to matter, to save lives, to choose love over fear. His story reminds us that our greatest purpose often emerges from our deepest pain, and that family isn't always blood. Sometimes it's the hearts that find their way to us when we need them most. The courage to open our door, to risk caring again, to believe we deserve companionship. These small acts can transform not just our own lives, but the lives of those desperately seeking connection. In a world that often overlooks wisdom and experience, Frank's journey proves that our capacity for love, sacrifice, and second chances never expires. What unexpected blessing came into your life during your most difficult season? Have you ever saved someone or something that ended up saving you in return? Share your story in the comments below. Your experience might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today.